right. Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Lily Kyle. Lily is a PhD candidate in soil science at North Carolina State University with a strong background in plant and soil sciences. She has conducted extensive research on sustainable agriculture, nutrient management, and plant-soil interactions. Her work has earned recognition in national research competitions, and she has published multiple studies regarding soil fertility and crop science. Beyond academia, Lily has served as a consultant in soil services and has been actively involved in leadership roles, mentoring and teaching at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. Her passion for soil science and its impact on agriculture makes her an invaluable voice in today's seminar. Please join me in welcoming Kyle, Lily Kyle.
Yeah. Wow, thanks so much, Diego. I need to have you introduce me every time. So today I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit about why we think that overapplication of phosphorus fertilizers are occurring in North Carolina. We've already seen just from previous research from faculty here that soil test phosphorus levels are high in North Carolina, but something I'm very interested and have always been interested in is the why behind things. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about, which is the first chapter of my dissertation, actually. But before I talk for 30 minutes about this resource of phosphorus, I need to establish why any of this matters. And to establish it, I have to take you all the way back to the Stone Age. And in the Stone Age, the demand for obsidian was really, really high. Obsidian was used for tools, a lot of weaponry as well. So it was highly sought after. But then the demand for that resource came and went with the invention of bronze. And bronze was a far superior tool and weapon because it was a lot more durable. It didn't shatter like obsidian did. And so it really replaced the demand that once there was this great demand for obsidian, then no longer. And then bronze came and went as well with the introduction and invention of iron. And then we had the Iron Age. And you can see this cycle happen over and over and over again with weaponry. But this is not just limited to ancient warfare. We can see the demand for resources come and go even in modern times. So in the case of mercury, the price was once very, very high. If you look at the 1970s, it was quite expensive. And that's because it was used in thermometers. There was actually a huge range of industrial uses for this resource. But then it was replaced with new innovation, and thus the demand for mercury was no longer so important, and now it's half the price that it once was. And so we can see this cycle happen from the earliest documented history in the Stone Age up through current times of the demands for resources coming and going. But there is one resource that I can guarantee will always have a sustained demand no matter what. And that's phosphorus. Because phosphorus is one resource that's going to have a sustained demand because the role in living organisms cannot be replaced by any human advancement, right? It's the energy currency for all living things. It's the P in ATP. And there's no amount of technological innovation, no amount of human ingenuity that can replace phosphorus. And that's what we're working with. And in the case of agriculture, it's extremely important for plant yields, and nothing can replace that. And there is one problem, though, and that's that all resources on Earth have limitations. There's limits to the supply, and we can see that in everything. Phosphorus is no exception to that. And so there's something called peak phosphorus, which is just somebody who's modeling how much potential phosphorus there is on Earth, right? And it's estimated, some people estimate in the next 100 years, 200 years, there's different numbers, but at some point you're going to run out. especially with using it at the rate that we're using it. And at the same time, as we have limits there, we also are having increases in our human populations as well. That's expected to increase exponentially. And so the increased demands for food production, coupled with the limitations in resources, necessitates that society prioritize the efficient use of phosphorus. So this is extremely important, that we need to be more efficient in our use of it as a society, as a citizen on this earth. And so I was really excited when I started as a PhD student with Dr. Gattiboni, because as soon as he came to North Carolina, this is what he was working in, finding, more efficient uses of this, and also trying to correct inefficient uses. But he's also not the only one. There's other faculty, some sitting here right now, who've also worked on this. And Dr. Osman before him, he even built off of some of her work as well. And so I was really excited to come in and be a part of all of this with everyone to help find more efficient ways to use this resource. And so what I did when I started my dissertation was developing a survey for farmers to try to help understand why the soil test phosphorus in North Carolina is high. That's something that's been established by some of the other faculty here, but I wanted to help answer some of these long burning questions. And so some of the questions that we're going to answer in this presentation from our data is, okay, what are farmers reporting their soil phosphorus levels to be? What are some of the management decisions that they're utilizing? I want to know how likely farmers are to follow the soil test recommendations that they're receiving. I want to know what correlates there are when over-applications occur, like meaning, are there certain things in common? Are those who over-apply also doing these other things? And most importantly, as I mentioned, I want to know why. What's the reason when over-application occurs? Is there a mindset behind it? If we know that it's more than what is efficient, what is necessary, what might bring good yields to farmers, okay, then why is it happening? And a lot of what the motivation behind this is based off of models, right? Predicting future supply. Because a lot of that is future predictions, we also want to understand in the future how price might influence this resource. And if price changes, which are inevitable, are going to be changing how farmers are applying it. So I asked some questions about their usage as well, depending on the price changes. So here's an example of what the survey looked like if they had filled it out in the printed version. We had 19 questions on this survey, and it was approved by NCSU IRB office, and shortly thereafter, we distributed it to farmers. This was in February 2023. We had the help of the Corn Growers Association of North Carolina and the North Carolina Soybean Producers Association, where both of those associations helped send out emails to distribute this survey to growers. We also had county extension agents. I called about 50 of them on the phone, asking them to reach out to farmers in their counties. Some of them did. Some of them even sat down individually with the farmers, and those who didn't use online, they'd fill out the survey by hand. And so we had a lot of help from a lot of really great people. We kept everything anonymous for the protection of growers and also for the integrity of the survey, right? People might not answer as honestly. Everything isn't anonymous. And we used Excel to calculate most of our statistics because they are descriptive. So it works pretty well for that. And because I had all of the help from those associations, extension agents, we had 122 farmers participate. which I hear is a really good number when it comes to farmer participation in surveys. So that definitely was because of a lot of help from great people getting that out there. But anyways, what we found about those farmers, most of them are operating on larger farms by North Carolina standards. So I think the maximum acreage that they could select that they farm on was 1,000 acres. And over half of them selected that, which tells me I should have given them larger options. But they're growing on mostly larger acreage farms of the people who actually answered this. So this is pretty representative of bigger farm operations in North Carolina. They're also, where they're located is in more agriculturally productive areas. And what they responded that they're growing with mostly was corn and soy, and a lot of them also had a wheat rotated in there as well. So corn, soy, wheat, really important agronomic crops is who this speaks about. So this is important to just keep in mind moving forward. When I talk about the results of this survey, this is who answered it. This is who it's most representative of, right? North Carolina farmers on higher acreage growing corn, soy, wheat in agriculturally productive areas. So just a little bit of background. Those in soil science probably already know this, especially if you took soil fertility. But for those of you who aren't, this is a plant response curve. So on the x-axis, you have soil test, and then this soil test level, in this case, let's say like phosphorus. And then on the y-axis, you're gonna have your yield. So as you first have a little bit more of a nutrient, you're gonna have a huge response. That's where you see that curve. And then as you add more, the marginal utility of that does diminish, right? So as you get more and more and more, the yields still increase, but not quite as much until you reach a point where they no longer increase at all. That's the most yields you're gonna get for any additional amount of nutrient that you apply. And at that point, we call that the critical level. So we love this level. It's a great level because it's what's economically efficient, right? If you're below that, you're going to have yield losses due to lack of fertility. And a lot of growers who are operating on small profit margins don't want to have any loss due to fertility. But if you exceed that level, look, your yield doesn't go up at all, which sounds like a waste, right? Because now farmers are spending money on fertilizer that they don't need because it's doing nothing, wasting our precious resources. As I mentioned in the introduction, they are limited. We have reserves, but they are diminishing. And then there's also the potential for environmental issues when you're over applying fertilizers, right? It can get into the water system. So we really want to be at that perfect magic number. So what do you think farmers are at? Yeah, perfect magic number. Okay, what do you think farmers at? So these are the results from the survey, and these are what they reported their phosphorus to be. And they're at this high, very high area of reduction in farmer profit, wasted resources, potential pollution. So most of them are reporting soil phosphorus levels that exceed what is the most economically efficient, right? So this is a problem. Now, interestingly, you might recognize this graph, Dr. Kaluza. So her and Stephen Miller, they were able to run all samples from the NCDA from 2017 to 2019 or receive the data from that for soil phosphorus. And they plotted that by county. So that's the green North Carolina that you see there. And they found that the levels were very, very high. I thought it'd be really interesting to compare what people were reporting to that. And what I found in general were actually like similar in that like counties that she found or that Stephen Miller found to have higher soil P. We also had higher soil phosphorus. But in general, a little bit less. They were a little bit lower levels than what Miller et al. Reported. Now, there's a very obvious reason, could be I don't have enough data for that. I only have 122 responses. They had thousands. But I thought it's also interesting and something to think about. Another potential reason might be because respondents are underreporting. Maybe they don't want to say it's as high as it really is. Or maybe they're underestimating. Maybe they actually don't know exactly what their soil phosphorus level is at all times in their soil. Maybe they don't know. So one of the questions we asked to confirm this is, how often do you soil sample? And what we found was that 99% of farmers are sampling at or more often than recommended frequency. So that tells us, okay, our high soil phosphorus is not due to lack of soil sampling. There's plenty of soil sampling happening. More than half are doing it every single year. I also asked them, what percentage of the soil samples do you send to NCDA? And half of them are sending it there. So we know that half of them are receiving soil test recommendations, right? Because when you send your soil sample to NCDA, you also get the accompanying recommendations as well. And so that's telling me it's not due to lack of knowledge of what's in their soil. That's not the why. So let's keep exploring. We asked them, do you strictly follow the phosphorus recommendations indicated on the soil test report, or do you adjust based on your own experience? And a surprisingly large amount of them all admitted that they adjust based on their experience or somebody else's experience, but they're not just sticking to what the recommendations say. So they're changing it. That could be a reason why. I did look at the average phosphorus level depending on what their answer was to that, because I could see, what they said their P was and then run it to see what their answer to this was. And on average, actually their phosphorus level didn't change much depending on what their answer to that question was. So this doesn't fully explain why the levels are high. So we keep digging. We asked them if the soil test report points out that it's not necessary to apply phosphorus, you will. And once again, we have more than half of them admitting that they are going to apply additional, even when the soil test says the report says they don't need any more. And unfortunately, 36% of those farmers are applying a fair amount, like the maximum that I even gave as an answer, in addition to whatever high level they already have is. So this really helps explain a little bit about why we might be having high levels of P. But it doesn't fully explain everything on trying to understand the why. So I dug in a little bit more and I asked, okay, are you applying even more than the soil test report indicates, because maybe they've seen deficiency symptoms in the past, right? Okay, one time when I didn't apply phosphorus, then all my plants, I had really bad yield that year. And a large percentage of the respondents did indicate that they have seen, they saw deficiency symptoms when they didn't apply. I'm a little bit skeptical if this is necessarily true, because I was able to look at what their soil phosphorus level was based on their answer to that question, and they were no different whether they said yes or no. It's very likely that they could have mistaken a deficiency symptom for something else. That's very common. Sometimes phosphorus deficiency can be hard to identify, and it could be due to another nutrient or pests or just bad weather. So they could be applying it more out of fear. But what I think, really taking all of this information and putting it together, what our theory is on why overapplication is occurring is something in economics called compounding conservatism. So we want to know, what is the perfect economic level of phosphorus that farmers should be applying? What should be in the soil? We know that's the critical level. Okay, but how do we figure that out? Well, some of that is you guys figuring that out. We have John's looking at that. We have other people here, scientists who are doing studies based on the plant response to find that critical level. But nothing in science is perfect. You don't just magically spit out like a perfect number that we know is true every time. It can be based on statistics, which doesn't always follow perfectly in the real world. And so at the end of the day, you just have to pick a number. You have to say, okay, we think it's this, but it's based on data. We're pretty close. But if you pick it at the end of the day, if you're picking it, are you going to be, you can have a range. Are you going to go here? Are you going to go here? If it was me, I might be more likely to be on the higher end, because if I underestimated how much a farmer should be putting down and they lost yields because of it, I would feel pretty bad. Like, that's their money. I don't want to be responsible for them losing yields at the end of the day. So I might put a little buffer on it. Like, just make sure that they're not losing any, right? We don't want them to lose money on that. Plus, if you over apply, they don't know that they're over applying, because there's no yield response to over applying phosphorus usually. Like, you're not gonna diminish your yield, so might as well apply a little more. Give them a little buffer to it. Okay, then the farmer gets that number, and we know, as they indicated, they get their soil test report, and then they add more phosphorus on top of that, as they are telling us. So then you end up having an overestimation of an already overestimated value. So it's like a double buffer. And then you end up reduction in farmer profits, waste of resources, potential pollution. So putting all this together, I think, helps answer some of the why this is occurring, because there's a lot of uncertainty in agriculture. Like, we know that there's weather, we can't control that. There's the price of grain out of the farmer's control. But one thing that they can control is their fertility, and they are not willing to risk losing yields due to lack of fertility, which is one thing that is in their control. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot of this double buffer situation. As I mentioned, I'm so interested in how price might affect their decisions, though. And so when I developed this survey, and then by the time we sent it out, the price of fertilizer is pretty high. And we asked them in 2022, the price of fertilizer skyrocketed. Did you reduce the average rate of phosphorus used in your fields due to the high prices? And most of them didn't reduce the rate at all. Look at that, 52%. They didn't even change it, even though it like quadrupled in price. I asked them, how do you perceive that future price changes in fertilizer might influence your applications? Give them an opportunity to type something to maybe provide more detail as to why they're selecting what they're selecting. And they'll tell you, got to have fertility to have the crop. I mean, yeah, we'll apply what is needed. We'll change it very little. Probably not. You have to keep the levels correct. Cutting out phosphorus cuts out yield. This is confirming to me our theory, where they don't want to risk losing yield due to lack of fertility, so they're going to overestimate. Prices won't affect my decision. They'll tell you straight up, I'll apply no matter what. So given all this information, a lot of people say, okay, we have this grand challenge. You showed us, Lily, over application of phosphorus. This needs to be fixed. We can't go on like this. We need a tax. We got to just tax phosphorus. And it sounds like a great idea, except it's not. And I'm going to show you why. So a Pagovian tax is a tax implemented to correct market inefficiencies, right? And in this case, it's to reduce overuse of phosphorus by artificially increasing the price. So here's an example of a good with an elastic demand. So if you look at P2, that's price. Let's say in this case, the price of a good is 2. Now let's mosey on over to the Q associated on that demand curve with the price, and you have a quantity of 100. So let's say in this case, this elastic good is maybe, my purse, okay? This is Michael Kors. If I went to a Michael Kors store, it might cost me $350. I'm a grad student. I'm not paying that, right? I have the same reaction. I would never pay that price. However, if I walk into Plato's Closet, which is where I got this, and it was $30, I might buy it because this is a luxury good. It's a price sensitive good. If the price is really, really cheap, you might have a lot of people. I might not be the only one. There might be other women in Plato's Closet fighting me for it because it's a good deal. But when it's at its high price, you're going to have very few customers. That's an example of elastic demand. So what happens at the price of 2, there's 100 purses, fertilizers, whatever you want it to be, being bought. Now let's add a tax, artificially increase that price to 5, whatever, 500. And now let's look on our demand curve. Okay, now we only have 50 being bought. So it worked. Essentially raising the price reduced the quantity, which is what you want in a corrective tax. But what happens when you have an inelastic demand? So an example of that might be like eggs. Eggs went up in price a lot recently. We all can relate to that, but we all probably still got eggs anyways, at least from what I'm seeing in the grocery store. I went to Costco, all the eggs are gone, despite the really high prices. So this is a good that people are gonna buy no matter what. You can increase the price of purses, people are gonna opt out. You increase the price of eggs a lot, we still need to eat. We still need protein. It's still a relatively cheaper source of protein. We gotta have it. And so the price might be 2 to 5, but the quantity being used is only going from 100 to 80. So now that you know the difference between an elastic versus an inelastic demand, what do you think farmers view phosphorus fertilizer as? Given everything I said. Inelastic, exactly. As they told us, prices won't affect my decision. They told us that last slide. They're gonna pay whatever they have to pay every time to make sure that they're not losing yields due to lack of fertility. Yeah, and we heard all the other, they're saying the same thing. That's why 52% didn't change anything despite the 4 times price yield. So this is why a tax would be ineffective, because you can artificially increase the price in that it's not even going to change how much is being used because they're going to use it anyways. They're going to pay what they have to pay to make sure they're not losing any yields. And it really does further confirm our theories on everything else we've been seeing. So another reason, not only is it ineffective, but it also might have other unintended consequences. So price of food could increase due to larger input costs. And what happens when farmers are having to pay more for their fertilizer, the price of food goes up. Guess who ends up suffering when the price of food goes up? Those who are economically disadvantaged, because a larger percentage of their income is going towards food than somebody who's richer. So then you're just furthering the divide between rich and poor by implementing these ineffective solutions. And also, these regulation strategies do require more monitoring, can be costly to farmers, difficult to implement, and it could also diminish the intended impact of the regulation as it could alienate farmers as well. I think one possible effective solution is just continuing support of our extension services. So O'Connell and Osmond conducted a survey for Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio farmers. They found that 15% of North Carolina farmers were using extension to help make decisions, whereas in Ohio, only 5%. And you can see what I have highlighted here. It's because Ohio doesn't have a lot of funding towards extension. They don't provide a lot of that, especially in relation to their agricultural productivity. And so in that same survey, O'Connell and Osmond also asked farmers how likely they were to care about nutrient management and water quality. And in North Carolina, they're a lot more likely to care. So there could be some relationship between benefits seen that from extension resources that aren't necessarily like tied to profits, right? That are unintended benefits. And so right now we're in a time where federal and state agencies are looking at cutting government waste. They're looking at cutting a lot of programs. And I just want those who are in decision-making roles to keep in mind how important our grand challenges in phosphorus are, and how much there could be unintended consequences to cutting out some of these services that might not be tied directly to profits, that you might not always see the benefit, but are certainly contributing towards benefiting society as a whole. Because right now we have economic inefficiency with how much phosphorus is being applied. It's beyond beneficial to farmers and the environment, right? We're wasting our precious resources and farmers are making less and there's environmental damage. And right now, extension services might be one thing that's connecting farmers to research. And if you underfund or dissolve those programs, there might be a lot of economic consequences that are indirectly tied to that make these grand challenges in conserving phosphorus even greater. So my desire is to see phosphorus applied at a rate that's closer to that perfect critical level where yields are not sacrificed, but neither are our resources. And if we can get there, it's an everybody wins scenario. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming. And I really am opportunistic that we can all work towards this everyone wins scenario. And all of you guys are a part of that. We need future collaborations among researchers to get towards that. We published this paper along with co-authors, so Dr. Luke Addaboni, Dr. Osman, Dr. Anna Marie Marshall, who's a sociologist at Illinois, as well as Dr. Johnson and Dr. Duckworth. So if you have more interest in the details of this, you can read it here. That's the title. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Lily, for that very insightful presentation. Now we open the floor for some questions. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's cool, right? So where we miss to convince the farmer is as a scientist, as a extension of service, where we missed to convince farmers, hey, there's too much data. Where did you miss?
Yeah. Good question. So, if we have extension services now, why hasn't this problem been fixed? We have known about the high soil phosphorus levels. This isn't brand new. As I said, Dr. Osman has been long working on this. But this is not a problem that can be solved overnight. I think it's going to take many, many years of continuing this message of multiple people in extension on board, sharing the same vision. It's going to take collaboration with researchers to keep pushing this forward, and just time and patience. So I don't know that we necessarily have missed the mark and it's too late. I just think it's something that we need to continue strongly moving forward towards.
Or is there other approaches to convince them? Like other ways?
I'm open to any suggestions. Do you have one? What do you got? No, I'm serious. Like anything you guys have, let's talk about it.
No, I'm just curious to know the other approaches.
I thought a lot about when writing this whole solution section. And it's pretty challenging because there's approaches that require more authoritative, the stick. And a lot of history shows like in the US, it's not always effective, like in other countries it can work, but not always here. And so I think it takes more incentivizing farmers and that in general, that's kind of more my perspective on it. Dr. Kaluza?
In your survey, how farmers identified their cropping systems? Did you give them a list or did they type out the crops that they're growing? Did you ask for relative, like percentages as far as acres? How did that, flow work, within your survey?
So we just asked them, what are the row crops that you grow? And then I had a list of pretty common ones that they can multiple select, as well as an option to type in. So for the most part, we were seeing corn and soy probably because the associations that help distribute the surveys, and that's what most people are growing. But we also did see some other crops as well that people typed in, like sweet potatoes, tobacco, hay, a couple Christmas trees in there, some vegetables, Irish potatoes. So we were able to break down like all of our analysis by crop when we wanted to, if that's where you're going with it. But yeah, they were able to select.
Yeah, actually, I was, curious if you found that any of your responses as far as the cropping systems correlated to the dominant crops grown in the county. Did you see a strong correlation, or was there no correlation?
Yeah, so we broke it down by crop, and in general, phosphorus levels were a little bit higher in corn. But I didn't see anything that was strong enough telling me that this is a reason why, because they're growing this crop, because they were high across almost all crops. There were no crops that it was lower than what it should be. So there wasn't as much difference as you might expect. Yeah. All right, Modesta?
Yeah, thanks, Lily, for that wonderful presentation. I'm not a farmer or a soil scientist, but you've made me care so much about phosphorus. So I want to join this fight to find a solution. And I was thinking, have you, or I don't know what this might entail, but do you think going the route of producers would help? In the sense that you get them to reduce the concentration of how much, I don't know if this is ever even making any sense, but the concentration of phosphorus that they give to farmers, could that be a way to reduce they maintain the way they apply, but then the concentration that they get from applying that same quantity is reduced? Is that a feasible thing in soil science? I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Like,
Okay.
could you repeat it?
Yeah, so with phosphorus application, right? Like, so they have specific concentration that they have to, that they make in the bag. So I don't know how phosphorus is produced, but they have a specific concentration that they produce, right? So if you want to target a different stakeholder, like target the producers and get the producers to maybe reduce the concentration of the phosphorus that they make for these farmers, so that while the farmers apply the same quantity, they get different concentration in the soil.
I see what you mean. Yeah. So we did ask them about like how much they're applying as well. I didn't include it in the survey. But they're applying it based on P2O, like phosphate per like acreage. And so it doesn't matter what the bag says. There's different fertilizers they have to choose from, and whether they use that or even organic fertilizers like manure, they're still applying a lot regardless. Although I like the creativity and thinking, okay, maybe we just, they can keep applying a lot and it'll just be a less concentration.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily what's stopping that. Okay, Dr. Duckworth.
So I'm not an economist. And I think you made a pretty good argument that like a flat tax on this would be not a useful thing to do. But I mean, most goods aren't truly inelastic, right? At some point you hit the curve, like it becomes too expensive and it becomes a decision-making criteria. So I was wondering if you talked to like any economists about more complicated structures for taxing and regulatory strategies for phosphorus. I'm not advocating this, but obviously there are schemes like, if you have somebody who has a certain number of acres, they can buy a certain number of acres at a certain price, and above that it costs more because it's taxed.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there are lots of frameworks. Something's truly inelastic that there's all kinds of crazy economic opportunities that could be associated with revenue generation from it. So I don't know if you've talked to anybody about these sort of
Well, you're absolutely right that I definitely provided a more oversimplified version of how things actually work. Something that's perfectly inelastic is gonna be a straight line and that rarely ever happens. And I reached out to an economist here at NC State, but they never responded. So the soil scientist has to be the one to be the economist. And I'm sure that if somebody wanted to build on this, like this is something they could explore. They could also, if somebody's interested, actually make their own real demand curve. I gave 2 fake examples, but you could collect data, or one could collect data and create and generate a curve to see how elastic or inelastic it is. I just selected one based on all the responses I was getting. I'm like, okay, based on what everyone's saying, this looks more like something that's inelastic. But somebody could actually find this out for real if they wanted to.
There's a question from Sweden.
Oh, okay. I don't know how to find them. Hi. Shit. How do I find you, Zoom? No.
Go up to the green bar.